Welcome to Backstage with Richard Ridge. SAG-AFTRA Foundation and BroadwayWorld continue their filmed Conversation Q&A series, which celebrates the vibrant theater community here in New York City. This event, which is coming from the Robin Williams Center, is a very special conversation with a multifaceted actor and playwright. He won the 2008 Pulitzer Prize for Drama for his groundbreaking play, August, Osage County. He got the Tony Award for Best Actor for his electrifying portrayal of George in the recent revival of Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. You know him from stage, screen, and television. Well, now he is back on Broadway with his latest play, Linda Vista. Please welcome Tracy Letts. Welcome back to Broadway with your latest play, the brutally comedic and wonderful Linda Vista.
Thank you.
How did this play come about for you to write?
Like a lot of things, very haphazardly. I normally spend some years in contemplation of a play I'm going to write, and I'll have to have. I don't have to know everything that happens, but I have to know how it ends. I can't write unless I know the ending, unless I know what I'm writing toward. Linda Vista was not that at all. I did not follow that pattern at all, in that I was between projects, and I just rolled a sheet of paper in the typewriter and started writing. Just doing some free writing, which a lot of writers do. Some of you, I think, are writers as well. So a lot of writers do, just to keep your mind operating and your fingers nimble on the keyboard. I work on a typewriter, and sometimes it never becomes anything. It always just goes in the drawer or goes in the trash. It never becomes anything. And this did. It started as a dialogue between two nameless characters, and so something came out of unconscious, subconscious place and turned into a dialogue with these guys, and I kind of became interested in what they were talking about, and then I started to become particularly interested in this one guy. And before I knew it, he had started to take on some definable features. And I became interested in exploring him, and it eventually became Linda Vista. Yeah. I threatened, before we started this, I threatened Richard by saying I was going to just answer the first question for 90 minutes.
We were going to cut him off. So obviously you're talking about Wheeler.
Yes.
Talk about, how many people have seen Linda Vista already or are going to see it? Yeah.
Nice. Well, he's a complicated guy.
Yeah.
He's maddening. He's mercurial. He's slippery. He's a slippery character. You don't really. He wins your sympathies. One of the things I love about the play is that he is our protagonist until he isn't. Until suddenly we find ourselves as an audience shifting and saying, "Wait a minute, I don't know if I like this guy," and he sort of becomes an antagonist in his own story. And hopefully by the end, he's maybe trying to win the audience's sympathies back a little bit, trying to find some place in us where we have a little compassion for him. It's challenging. Some people think it's me or it's autobiographical. It's not. He borrows a lot from me, certainly. A lot of his opinions and stuff were easier to write if they came from me. Some of them weren't. Some of them were because it's what the character needed to do. I don't have particularly strong feelings about Radiohead, for instance, though Wheeler doesn't care for Radiohead. But he's also an amalgam of a lot of guys I know. They're my age. They're divorced, going through divorces, have kids. For whatever reason, a little stuck in life. They're friends of mine. They've seen the show. I've talked to them about this. Nothing about it is, they know they're fair game because they're friends of mine. So, and I've warned them all. But the danger you always have with that is that people come and they either think the entire play is about them. It's like, oh, you've written a play about me because that's something I said. You've written a whole play about me. It's like, no, it's not about you. Or they don't get it at all. It's like, boy, that guy was a nightmare. I don't identify with that at all. So he's he's both some of me, some of my friends, and pure creation.
Yeah. I read where you said that the play is about seeing. Would you sort of go on that?
Well, the more I wrestled with that question of being stuck,
Yeah.
I kept coming back to this idea that we often can't see ourselves when we're screwing up. When our life is going off the rails, we don't see it. It's easier to see it in other people. We don't often see it in ourselves. You can see it with some hindsight. This is my experience in a way. Maybe other people are different, but in my experience is that you can only sort of see it with hindsight. And one of the initial things that intrigued me about the guy, people have noted some of the anti-Trump rhetoric he spouts at the beginning of the play. Some people like that, some people don't. But I know it's certainly common to a lot of my friends that that's a common topic of conversation. But it also occurred to me that when I talk about politics, art, culture, I feel that my views are unimpeachable, and that I, if you'll pardon the word, and that I occupy a kind of moral high ground, and I can be very judgmental in that. And at the same time, particularly in my life, in my dealings with romance and love, I've often behaved in unethical and disrespectful fashion. And it was a way of trying to examine that, the way that you can call it hypocrisy. I suppose it's a kind of hypocrisy that you can conduct yourself with such integrity in one realm of your life and yet without any integrity in another realm of your life. And I actually find that's pretty common to a lot of people, that, right, our morality is very often circumstantial. And so I wanted to examine that with this play, which is one of the reasons people say, oh, I like that guy. Wait a second, I don't like that guy. Wait a second, maybe I like that guy. And then hopefully they start to ask that question about themselves. And the play, it becomes a kind of Rorschach test, as people find themselves invested in outcomes of different characters over the course of the show, wanting to see this character. You know, there's a moment in the show where he's asking a woman to take him back, that he's wronged, and there's such investment in that moment on the part of the audience. Some people wanting to see him given a break, and some people just, they desperately don't want her to take him back. And yet, we've all done it. We've all been in that situation, and most of us, a lot of us, have asked to be taken back when we didn't deserve it, or were taken back when we didn't deserve it, or took somebody back who didn't deserve it. I've had women working on the show say to me, oh, she can't possibly take that guy back. And I ask them, I say, have you ever taken a guy back who didn't deserve it? Yeah, sure, I've done it. It's like, well, so that's one of the things as a dramatist I hope to do, is to present dramatic situations that audiences can invest in, and hopefully maybe start some conversations or even some arguments for people on their way out of the theater.
Yeah. It's a beautiful play. If you haven't seen this play, 'cause I read the play first and had my thoughts on it, and then I saw it through all different eyes, because you can follow different characters in the show too. It's really superb. Brilliant cast you have, of course, led by Jan Barford. Talk about the brilliant cast you have in this show.
Well, I'm so lucky.
Yeah.
I'm just such a lucky guy that I'm a part of Steppenwolf Theater Company, and that I have this amazing resource of actors. We have 50 members of our company, mostly actors, some writers and directors, but they're all, not only are they marvelous performers, but they're really steeped in the language of creating a new play. Yeah. They understand what's involved in creating a new play, that their first obligation as an actor is not to actually inhabit the character, but to help tell a story. And so they understand that, and they are able to ask the right questions of me. I ask for a lot of input from my actors based on their own personal experiences too. I want to hear their own experiences and histories. I want that to become a part of the play. There's a lot of dialogue encouraged in the rehearsal room. I'm rarely a person dictating, this is the way. There's an open dialogue, open channels of dialogue throughout the room. And so they're very skilled at all of that. And then they're just such marvelous performers that they walk on stage and they just bring a whole life with them. You feel a whole life. I used to say to the actors playing Paul and Margaret, a married couple in the play, I used to say, we can see your house. Your house is never described in the play, and yet you've created such a believable couple where you're so believable in this marriage. I think if you polled the audience, they would say, oh, I know exactly the house they live in, right? You can kind of picture the life that they bring with them on the stage. Great actors.
Yeah. You are back working with director Dexter Bullard again.
Yes.
Who you'd worked a long time with. Talk about your collaboration with him and why it works so well.
I first worked with Dexter in 1990. He had started something in Chicago, well, in Evanston actually, called the Next Lab. Next Theater in Evanston was a long-standing, it's out of business, unfortunately, as of a couple of years ago, but it was very near Northwestern University and a great small equity house. But Dexter, as an associate artistic director there, had started something called the Lab, which was basically a classroom in the Noyes Cultural Arts Center in Evanston. He took all the chairs out of it and painted the whole room black, and it became a theater, and it became a 40-seat black box theater. His first show in there was Bouncers by John Godber. And it kind of screwed up the expectations for the Lab because it was a massive hit. It ran forever and ran for so long in Chicago, that in Evanston, that we wound up moving it in a commercial production to the Royal George across the street from the Steppenwolf. I joined that production as an understudy. The show had become a hit, and so they knew they were going to need some understudies or replacements for the show. And 1 or 2 weeks after I joined, the lead actor decided he wanted to do another show, and Dexter, rather than keeping me as the understudy, just promoted me into that job, and so I wound up doing Bouncers for a year, which was a great job, great fun, great play. It's only interesting in that it's how I got to know Dexter, but it's also, the Next Lab is where my first play, Killer Joe, made its premiere a couple of years later. So that relationship I had with Dexter was very important in formative years for me in Chicago. And then a couple of years after that, I had done Bug. Bug premiered in London, actually, at a small pub theater, the Gate Theater in London. And then when it was coming to the US premiere was at Woolly Mammoth in DC, but then when we were coming to Chicago, I made a change of director and asked Dexter to take over as the director. Me and the original director weren't entirely on the same page about it, and so Dexter came in and took over as the director of the piece, and it really took off from there. And then some version of that production is what wound up here in New York in 2002, I think, also directed by Dexter. So I have a long history with him. You know, at Steppenwolf, we almost always consider ensemble directors first. And I've worked with many of them, Anna Shapiro, Amy Morton, Tina Landau. Female directors have never really been uncommon in Chicago, which is a great thing, and Frank Galati and others. But for this, Anna and I both sort of intuited that Dexter was the right director for this piece, and I had not worked with him in a long time. It was thrilling to be back in the rehearsal room with him.
Just brilliant job, absolutely brilliant job. Whose idea was it to use Steely Dan music?
Mine.
It was yours, okay. Because that was a question one audience member has. And I was like, wow, I never knew that. So is it in the play? In the written version of the play?
Well, it's not the written version, because then I'd have to pay every time. Got it. It was, in fact, well, it's kind of an interesting story in that it actually grew out of a line in the play. In the first scene, his friend, Wheeler's friend, says, as they're moving into this lousy apartment in Linda Vista, his friend says, it's a long time to be living like this, kind of stringing along
Yeah.
the way he is. And Wheeler says, what do you mean like this? And his friend says, like a character in a Steely Dan song, which if you know Steely Dan, you kind of understand that joke, and if you don't, so what? It's quick, we move on. But I thought, wouldn't it be nice at the end of that first scene to play a Steely Dan cut, because we liked the idea that something about the play felt a little old school, that the sound design would not be freshly composed music, but would rather be needle drop. So we tried the Steely Dan, and it sounded great, and we said, well, what if it's all Steely Dan? So we used Steely Dan in Chicago, and it just worked beautifully. Then we were going to Los Angeles, and we had to deal with the rights in LA, and it was a bit of a hassle to get the rights, and we thought we weren't going to get them, and we thought we were going to have to make a change, and then in the last second, somebody had a change of heart, and we got the music. Then we were coming to New York, and suddenly they wanted a lot of money. They hear Broadway and they think it's Hamilton, and so this is our payday. It's like, actually, this is still nonprofit theater, right? This is still and so we went back and forth with managers, etc. Finally, we just realized we're not going to get it. They're not going to buy it. They told us, in fact, the management concern told us, they said, you are not going to get this music. Give it up. So Jan Barford was talking to Bill Peterson, who's a member of our ensemble. And Bill Peterson used to be on CSI with Marg Helgenberger. And Marg used to be married to a man named Alan Rosenberg, and Alan Rosenberg is Donald Fagen's first cousin. And through that chain, I got Donald Fagen's email address, and I emailed him a long email, and he wrote back and said, yeah, we'll make that work for you.
See?
And we wound up with the music.
Actors, see how it's done?
Yeah.
It all comes back. That's a great story. I want to go back to the beginning. Growing up in Oklahoma, what were your earliest creative outlets? Did you write your first story at 6?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
What was the story?
It was called The Psychopath.
6 years old.
We had to make little books in first grade, and it was called The Psychopath, and on the cover it showed a man who had hanged himself in a closet and shot himself in the head, which is an unusual way to commit suicide, but making sure the job is done. And I had a great first grade teacher who did not report me to social services, but rather gave me a nice grade, and I was a weird kid.
That was Mrs. Parker, right?
Mrs.
And she
Parker.
gave you an A+, right?
Yeah, A+, very
See?
creative, sure.
So you owe your career to Mrs. Parker.
Absolutely, yeah.
But was that teachers, right? Let's hear it for the teachers who see it early on. So was that like one of your earliest outlets, or what were they for you?
My parents were both teachers.
Yeah.
They were English teachers. They taught at a small university in the town where I grew up, Durant, Oklahoma, and the university was Southeastern Oklahoma State University. And they both taught English there. And they were great, creative people. They both had bizarre second acts to their lives in that they both, after retiring, had some success in the arts themselves. My father as an actor and my mother as a writer. And here I am, an actor and a writer. So they were people who had always encouraged creative endeavor. We paid a lot of attention to that stuff in my house. The house was always filled with books and music and discussion and film, and there wasn't a lot of theater in my town, but what there was, we saw or we participated in. My first play was when I was 15. A director, since we have 90 minutes, I'll tell the story.
Thank you.
A director was directing a production of the Solid Gold Cadillac in Tishomingo, Oklahoma, and she wanted my father to play a part in it. My father was a good actor locally, and she wanted him to play a part, and he didn't want to drive to Tishomingo, Oklahoma, which was an hour away from my town. So she kind of ran an end around, and she went to me and asked me if I would play the narrator in the Solid Gold Cadillac. I was 15. If I took the job, she knew that Dad had to drive me to Tishomingo. And so he might as well say yes. So that's what happened. That was my first play, and Dad was in the show, and it was Solid Gold Cadillac. And there was a woman in that show who was Miss Oklahoma or runner-up to Miss Oklahoma, and I was 15 years old, and I thought, I think I'm going to be in the theater. I was really taken with her and taken with the whole experience. I really loved it. It really felt like a great fit for me. I was a kid who was, I have an older brother, I have two older brothers, but one of my older brothers is he's a very gifted musician, and he was a bit of a prodigy. And I even chose the same instrument he chose. I played tenor saxophone throughout my years, but I just didn't have the feeling for it. I didn't, he could practice 7 hours a day. He had that music mind, that math, etc. mind that wanted to spend all the time in music theory and everything. I enjoyed music, but it just wasn't my thing. And so I was kind of looking for my thing, and I think at 15 I kind of found my thing. And I was an odd kid. I didn't really fit in my hometown, and so theater was a great. I had become a big movie buff. I loved film, and so once I discovered theater too, the marriage of film and theater, that stuff really, I had a great interest in that, and so I think that was the time at which I sort of decided this is what I want to do. And my parents were always very encouraging of that. They wanted us to do what they used to say is, as long as you don't work in a bank. That for them was kind of their goal as parents, to keep us, to get us out of Oklahoma and to keep us out of a bank.
I love that.
My apologies to any of you who might happen to work in a bank. Yeah.
You received the 2008 Pulitzer Prize for drama and the Tony Award. It was groundbreaking. I mean, we saw the show like 9 different times with all the different wonderful casts from Steppenwolf and all the people who went into this play. Still one of the top 10 nights and days I have ever spent in a theater, hands down. I've been going to the theater on Broadway since I was 10 years old. I mean, just to live in your play at the Music Box, when it moved, everything, just to live in that show was just absolutely brilliant. How did you come about to write that one? That was a whole family experience, wasn't it, for that play?
Yeah, it was, I mean, it's it's very loosely based, though. I mean, my mother's father committed suicide by drowning when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
And my grandmother, his wife, descended into years of downer addiction.
Yeah.
And the impact of both of those things on my family was profound and had ramifications, probably still has ramifications. It was really a profound thing in my family. And once years had gone by and I had a lot of years to chew on this and had gotten sober and gone through some therapy and was able to think about all this, my history with this piece, with this piece of history, I started to think about it as the basis for a play. As I became more and more familiar with the canon and especially, right, those great family plays, great American family plays, I thought, I think maybe that's the container for this story. To tell the story of my family is the big American family drama. So it's one of those that I did spend years thinking about. In some ways, you might say I spent 30 years thinking about it. The truth is I probably spent 5 or 6 years thinking seriously about it before I started work on it. And even then I did something a little different. I wrote the first act and then put it in a drawer intentionally for 6 months and didn't take it out for 6 months. And then 6 months later, took it out, rewrote the first act and wrote the second act and put it in a drawer for 6 months. And took it out and rewrote the first act and rewrote the second act and wrote the third act. I just knew it was such a big story, so many characters, so many ideas I wanted to get my arms around. I tend to write very fast. The actual first draft process is very fast for me. And so I wanted to sort of force myself to take time and think about it. And I wrote this thing based on my family history. I always have this funny feeling. I want to say it's so not my family in so many ways. The creation of the poet, patriarch, total fiction, 3 sisters. I have 2 older brothers. So much of it is pure creation. And yet, sitting in rehearsal in Chicago, I could sit there and go, that happened, that happened, that happened, that happened. He said that, she said that, he said that. It was like so much of it was actually from life kind of jumbled together and put in this play. The first person I showed it to was my mom, because I knew she would be affected. I didn't know how she would be affected, but she was the first person I showed it to. And her first comment was, "You've been very kind to my mother." Yeah. She was a piece of work, my grandma. So, and I showed it to my dad, and I had questioned him about some of the history. It was blurry to me because I was a 10-year-old kid, and I had questioned him about some of the details. I wanted to get some of the details right, and I didn't want to upset my mother by talking about it, so I knew I could talk to Dad about it. And Dad finally said, "Why are you writing about this?" And I said, "Well, Dad, my grandfather committed suicide by drowning when I was 10 years old. It's had a tremendous impact on our lives. I felt haunted by these events for much of my life." And Dad said, "You have?" It was one of the great things when we were even working on the show, and there's a moment where Violet, the mother, is being nasty to her granddaughter at the table. And it was always Jeff Perry and Amy Morton, who played the parents, always wanted to take care of the little girl. And I said, no, you don't take care of her. Don't take care of her. And they're like, but I said, you can be good parents and still drop the ball. Good parents do it every day. It happens again, that's part of being human. It's not conscious. You're not consciously saying, I'm not going to take care of my daughter. You're focused on other things. And I think even when I was 10 years old, my mother and father were focused on other things, right? It was a mind-blowing thing, what they were going through. They took their eye off the ball. And I think they could admit that to themselves. They could admit that to me and say, yeah, we probably took our eye off the ball some when you were a kid. We probably should have been paying a little more attention to the impact that was having on you when you were 10.
Yeah. At what point during the process did you realize, when the play was up and happening, the impact that this was having on audiences, the play?
First preview.
Yeah.
It was, that was one of the more profound experiences I've had in a theater, because anytime you write something, you hope it's going to have some effect purchase. You hope that people are going to like it, right? You want people to like it. You want people to be engaged by it. It's a hard thing to engage people for a long period of time, just to engage their interest, much less their enthusiasm. It's hard. It's part of the challenge of being a playwright. And so the first preview is you don't know what you've got until you put it up in front of people. You don't know how it's going to work. And I remember standing in the back of the house at Steppenwolf with Anna and looking at her like, oh, shit. We had never really observed anything in a theater quite like it. I don't think I ever have to this day. The talking that audiences were doing to the stage while it was happening, the talking to each other, people who didn't know each other, talking to each other in the audience about what they were seeing on the stage. So gratifying. You know in that moment that you're touching something that people need to see, and that for a person who's worked in the theater, for a person who's worked in storytelling for a long time, there's nothing better than that. It was an extraordinary experience.
So I know a lot of you saw this. It was like you were in the living room, you were in that house. That's why the audience could like talk back. You were like a guest at all those things happening at the house.
You know, we have so many examples of people coming up to us, not just in Chicago or New York or any of the places we went on tour, but London and now around the world. People who come and say, "You've been spying on my family. How'd you know what was going on in my family?" And you realize, you realize how universal it is that you know, families are screwed up things and do some crazy stuff. Yeah.
Everyone sees their family in that in that play.
Sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
In Denver, they don't. In Denver, they go, "What the hell is going on with these people?"
Well, that's Denver.
Denver.
Well, you know,
very happy families in Denver, as it turns out.
You won the Tony Award for your electrifying performance of George in the shattering production of Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I'm not sure, I mean, I've seen many incarnations of that show. How life-changing and challenging was that role for you?
People ask me if I have roles I want to play in the theater. I don't have a lot of them. George was one of them. George maybe was the one. When I was a kid, that 15-year-old kid in Durant, Oklahoma, I remember getting my dad's dog-eared copy, paperback copy of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and doing it, reading it out loud in my bedroom. You know, suddenly I'm going to be an actor, and I'm acting. So I knew that play really intimately. Amy had gotten that opportunity to direct it at the Alliance a few years back, and she'd asked me to do it. And I was 38 at the time, and I knew I was too young for the piece. George is written to be, I think, 46, and yet he identifies, he says, don't I appear a man in my 50s? So at 38, I knew I was too young for the part, but I couldn't resist. At the time, I didn't know we were eventually going to do it again, so I said yes immediately. I worked with a New York actress who played Martha in that production. Her name was Margot Skinner. She played Martha in that production. She unfortunately died of a heart attack not that long after we had done the show. Margot had done the role 3 times before in the Regents. And I was so nervous as we were about to start previews. It was such a daunting thing. It was so hard. And Margot said to me at the time, she said, you have to think of this as part of a larger process. You're going to do this part again. You're too young for this. You're going to do it again. You should just view this as your first pass at this. You're just going to take all that you learned from doing this here and apply it the next time you do the show. And it really turned out to be true, because Margot died, and there came a point where, you know, Amy is also, like me, we're artistic associates at Steppenwolf. Mr. Albee had never allowed us to do Virginia Woolf. Steppenwolf had asked many times to do the show. I think Laurie had an interest in doing it when she was younger, and perhaps a bit too young for it. And Edward had always said no. We never got a clear answer as to why he had said no all those times. Pam McKinnon, who wound up directing the production, thought, it was her theory, that the reason he had said no was that he had heard of this reputation of rock and roll, in-your-face theater, and he said, "Not with my plays, you don't," thinking that we were going to do something crazy and obscure his work. So when Amy and I started kicking around the idea of doing it for Steppenwolf and applying for it, we thought, and we were friendly with Pam at this point, she had become really Edward's favorite director. We said we should get Pam to direct it, and maybe that will help us get the rights from Edward, and that's exactly how it happened.
Wow. So,
we decided, and so that was my second pass at it. I was a few years older, and we did it in Chicago for that initial run, and then we took it to the Arena Stage in D.C. and did it there, and that's where Jeffrey Richards saw it and said, well, New York needs to see this. And so, because some people said, it's too soon since the last production, but Jeffrey said, this is a whole different take. Audiences need to see this. And he said, but we want to do it on the 50th anniversary of the original production, which is, so we wound up waiting a year and a half to do it again. Again, I've always been a beneficiary of the really long incubation periods, time when you first do a thing till you get to New York to do it. I mean, I always feel like like an ambassador from Chicago coming to New York to present work. That's just how, I just don't feel like a New York artist. I feel like a Chicago artist who's here presenting work. And so I get frustrated and I bitch and moan to my wife a lot about how long it takes me to get something here. But the truth is I always benefit from that long period of time it takes to get something here.
Beautiful. We have a bottle of water coming for you.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
And of course, you met your wife,
Carrie Coon, doing Virginia Woolf. Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant, brilliant actress. See, you waited and look who you met.
Yeah.
See? Well, this season you will have your second Broadway play with The Minutes. We're all very excited about the new show, The Minutes, which Anna Shapiro is going to direct. What can you tell us about that?
I don't think I get to tell you anything about it. We've been so close to getting it to New York. Again, this is part of my frustration of getting stuff to New York. I will say that it deals with politics, American politics. I was writing it before the 2016 election. It is not about Donald Trump. It is not about Trumpism. It's not about, so to say it's about our political moment would not be accurate, since our political moment has probably changed since I walked in here today. So it's really not about that. It's, but it is about the way, it's about our system and whether or not our system is serving us. It's, all of that sounds way more serious. It's a comedy.
Well, we can't wait for that. We didn't get a chance to talk about Superior Donuts or Mary Page Marlowe. Read his plays, get his plays, but I want to thank you. I could talk to you for hours. This has totally flown by.
Thanks,
I thank
Richard.
you very much for your insight, your honesty, and this master class you have given everybody today. Ladies and gentlemen, Tracy Letts.
Thank you. Thank you.